My name's Alex Safian. I'm the Associate Director and Research Director of Camera. Welcome to this very important and timely webinar. Some students in Israel are very lucky because their professor is Eran Lerman, and they get to regularly benefit from his deep knowledge and wisdom. Today, at least, we will have the good fortune to also benefit from Eran's lucid and brilliant assessments of the key issues facing Israel. In these perilous and uncertain times, with the war against Hamas incomplete and Israel's answer to Iran's attack still up in the air, so to speak, there's no better guide for the perplexed. Eran is a reserve senior officer in the IDF. He was Deputy Director for Foreign Policy and International Affairs at the National Security Council in the Israeli Prime Minister's office, and he held senior posts in the IDF military intelligence for over 20 years. He teaches in the Middle East Studies program at Shalem College in Jerusalem, and in postgraduate programs at Tel Aviv University and the National Defense College. Eran is a third-generation Sabri. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and a mid-career MPA from Harvard University, and is vice president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. At the conclusion of Eran's remarks, we will take written questions from the audience. You should use the Q&A icon in the lower toolbar. Welcome, Eran.
Alex, thank you. I never imagined that the Harvard part of this bio would actually give me some discomfort, but here you go. Frankly, we've been going through a week like few others in our history, and I have to say, I have evidence to show that I wrote to people the evening of before the attack that I think the IDF or specifically the Israeli Air Force is going to have some fun tonight, and I went to bed not terribly concerned about the consequences of this Iranian attack because I was fairly confident about the results. I did not even dare to imagine just how thorough the defeat of this attack would be. And in a fascinating manner, of course, we all were aware in a general sense that something called the Middle East Air Defense Treaty Organization, which, mind you, is not a treaty and is not an organization, but it's a structure under the aegis of CENTCOM, to coordinate response to flying objects of this kind, has been built up since the time of the Abraham Accords in 2020 to the degree that this is a close working relationship. I just recently learned that the commander of our Air Force, General Barr, was in Europe to meet with his Arab colleagues recently. And so we are looking at a very different world, a different ball game, if you wish, than anything we knew in years past. So let me go through this story in a more orderly fashion. Let's start with the Iranian decision. It's a singular decision because until now, the Iranians were very good in sending their proxies to die for them, whether it's or their allies. Hamas, we have to be very precise. Hamas is not an Iranian proxy, but they are an Iranian ally. They work with the Iranians, not for the Iranians. But there is a proxy in Gaza, namely the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And there are the proxies in Lebanon, Hezbollah, fully owned Iranian proxy. There are the militias in Iraq and Syria, which have come under effective Iranian control. In the case of Syria, they were introduced by the Iranians under the overall umbrella of the IRGC presence there. And of course, we are also in conflict now, not we, I mean collectively, Israel, the United States, Britain, others, with the Houthis in Yemen, who are also essentially acting as Iranian proxies in the Arabian Peninsula. And all these years, and certainly in the last 6 months, the Iranians have been quite content to use their proxies, but avoid crossing the threshold of risk to their own hide by getting directly involved. So the question really arises, what drove them to break this tradition to actually go overboard and attack Israel directly. The official excuse, so to speak, is that we attacked a diplomatic premise, the Iranian consulate in Damascus, to kill Mohammad Reza Zahedi, essentially the coordinator of the IRGC Al-Quds Force, Foreign Operations Arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Syria. The man who coordinated the support for Hezbollah, their activities against Israel, the attempts to open up another front with Israel in the Golan Heights. So we have had every reason to go after him as part of our so-called campaign between the wars, which has been going on against the Iranian assets in Syria for more than 10 years now. IDF sources insist that they were aware that this is not actually a consular premise, but adjacent to it, which did not prevent the Iranians of accusing us of breaking the sanctity of diplomatic premises. All of a sudden, the people who raided the American embassy in 1979 and blew up the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992 have all of a sudden discovered the Vienna Convention and the sanctity of diplomatic premises. So that's almost ironic. But this is really a very poor explanation. This goes to something deeper. And frankly, I believe that the Iranians are increasingly concerned that they have failed to actually protect Hamas from destruction. And that the action by their allies, bitter as it has been for Israelis, who we've lost lives in the north, 10 civilians, 7 soldiers since the fighting began. Tens of thousands of our citizens have been evacuated from the areas adjacent to Lebanon. But beyond that, they have failed to divert the IDF away from Gaza. The Houthi attacks have done no damage of any real significance in Israel. The same is true for the attempts to penetrate from Syria and Iraq over Jordanian airspace. Basically, they have not done well, and they needed to escalate in order to basically to assert once again their control of this campaign against Israel, which is central simultaneously to their ideological commitments, to the definition of what the Iranian Revolution stands for, what it sacrificed all these years for. And it's also part of their bid for regional hegemony as the leaders of the so-called camp of resistance, the Mukawama, that's to Smkham al-Mukawama, the coalition of forces trying to overthrow the existing regional order in Israeli-Arab order. So basically, what they decided to do is to launch a coordinated attack that will bring their various assets to bear on a limited set of targets in Israel, all at the same time, essentially at the same half hour. And their assumption was that this would saturate our defenses and enable them to penetrate. So based on what we know now, we are talking about 170 odd drones, UAVs, as well as 30 cruise missiles, and a recent addition to the Iranian arsenal, and 120 medium-range, what you would be called in the European context, medium-range ballistic missiles launched from Iran. Now, the result was spectacular for two reasons, as I said. One is Israeli superiority. I think we're really, honestly, second to none in the capacities of our missile defense array, the three layers that involve Iron Dome at the lower level, David Sling at mid-level, and Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 at the a higher level equivalent of the American THAAD systems, but better tested and already battle tested and now proven. So credit goes to the Israelis who developed it, to the Americans who helped finance it. I remind you that the Arrow project is not on the US foreign military financing file, but it's a DoD project, 80% American, 20% Israeli. It comes from a different source, and it serves American needs as well as ours. And really, really remarkable results. You've heard probably the 99 or 98% failure claim. To be precise, it's 95% for the ballistic missiles penetrating. So 6 of the 120, more or less 6, actually made it into Israel, and 1 or 2 hit the area targeted, the airbase at Nevatim, doing minor damage that was immediately dealt with and was fully operational almost immediately after. The sole casualty, whether from debris from the Iranian missiles themselves or from the interceptors, is a 7-year-old Bedouin girl living in one of the unprotected and unrecognized villages, so to speak, in the northern Negev. So a fairly impressive result. And certainly, as I said, indicative not only of Israeli capability, but also, that's the second reason for this failure, the work of our partners in this mission, American, British, and French aircraft, American ships involved in the interception of ballistic missiles, the Aegis destroyers in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Jordanian, and as we say in Israel nowadays, aircraft from another country that whose name begins with an S, and it wasn't the Syrians, as you can probably imagine. So all of these were brought to bear on the Iranian attack, and the result was that none of the drones or cruise missiles, for that matter, ever made it to the Jordan River. The only penetrations were from the ballistic missiles, and of these, 95% were effectively intercepted. So this outcome in itself will reverberate down the ages as a remarkable technological and military result. And by the way, I should say, I wouldn't take seriously. I know this is an election cycle in America and people say things, but I wouldn't take seriously the claim that I've seen here and there that the Iranian strike was coordinated, that the United States was given and this was all orchestrated or whatever. It's true that the US had strong early warning indications. They may have come from Arab countries which were forewarned by the Iranians that things will fly over their heads. And the administration did, in this case, what it also did in February 22, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They tried to use their foreknowledge to deter the Iranians from actually carrying out the attack. As you know, this failed in both cases. but I wouldn't translate this into a conspiracy theory. Nobody could have predicted with any sense of safety that the result would be so poor. And had it been just, a few percentage points more successful, and we would have had serious Israeli casualties, we would have been facing an automatic Israeli response and not the range of options that we now have. And so I would look at this as an authentic Iranian attack that was made known to some of the Arab neighbors in a very general sense, and was also monitored effectively by intelligence capacities of the United States and, of course, of Israel and others. Now, the level of coordination was extraordinary, and to a large extent, this was carried out by the U.S. Central Command, and it is a direct result of the fact that Israel was transferred from the European Command to the AOR, Area of Responsibility, to the CENTCOM AOR. It was a decision taken by the Trump administration, implemented by the Biden administration 3 years ago, and proven to have been a very effective and forward-looking decision, because it enables us to coordinate quite closely with others in the region who share our concern and fear and worry about Iranian intentions. So now Israel faces a dilemma. It is not a question of capabilities. I've already took a quick look at least one of the questions that I see in the Q&A. The IDF, without going into too much detail, has in its arsenal more than one way of reaching Iranian territory if need be. There are reports that Israeli F-35s have already been undetected over Iranian territory, just to make sure that we know how to go there. And we have other means that could, a variety of other means that could reach Iranian territory if necessary. And plans were there for an immediate and extensive response. The story has it that an urgent American phone call held our hand, reminiscent of the days in 1991 when President Bush asked Shamir to avoid a retaliation for the Iraqi missile strikes at Tel Aviv and Haifa. But I would suggest that, first of all, this also has to do with Netanyahu's traditional caution about jumping head-on into military escalation. Contrary to his image and to some extent to his own rhetoric, he is a very cautious decision maker when it comes to the use of force, and certainly to the massive escalation that may follow an Israeli all-out attack on Iran. Right now, there are more than one good reason to say that's not just about American pressure for Israel to consider other options than an all-out assault. And that basically, of course, would mean in all likelihood a war in the north as well, while we are yet unfinished in Gaza. Would involve a serious threat to our civilian infrastructure, not from the Iranians, but from the capacity of Hezbollah to saturate our defenses. And ultimately, of course, civilian losses, etc., are things that no decision maker in Israel or anywhere else takes lightly. Moreover, while we can and should let the Iranians know that they've not created a new deterrent equation, that our campaign, the so-called campaign between the wars, our CBW, or MABAM by its Hebrew initials, Ma'acha Ben HaMilchamot, which has been going on persistently essentially since the Syria that we know began to crumble in 2011, and the Iranians and their proxies moved in, and we had to take measures to reduce their capabilities and prevent Syria from becoming a highway of supplies to Hezbollah. And we've been doing this, and we must continue to do so as to signal in an unambiguous way that they have not created a new deterrent equation. But to go all the way to an attack on Iran itself, I think the result of the Iranian attack gave us the option of, as they say now in Israel, we will do what we need to do at the moment and place of our choosing. Keep them on their toes, keep them worried, keep them scared. They are doing their best to show that they are not scared, which tells me that they are scared. And in a more immediate sense, the most grievous damage that we can do to the Iranians is to destroy their ally and their proxy, Hamas and PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, in Gaza, irretrievably. And so prove that we can break the back of the resistance, the axis of resistance, the Mukawama. There are symbolic elements involved. The legend that Hezbollah and the Iranians have tried to create is that they don't fear death. They love death. They are willing to sacrifice any amount of their people, and they will fight to the finish, whereas us, Zionists, soft and sybaritic Zionists, we love life, and therefore we are going to be defeated. Now, if you look at the images coming out of Gaza recently, for example, in the operation at Shifa Hospital, you see hundreds, literally hundreds of Hamas operatives raising their arms in surrender. And I think this is symbolically even more important than actually killing them off, because it breaks not only, first of all, it gives us speaking tongues, which is a crucial thing, particularly in a war on terror. But it also symbolizes that there's something fallacious, there's something basically false about the Hamas and Islamist claim that they would fight to the finish. And to break this alliance, to break more both physically in Gaza and morally, is a vital achievement. And so if the calculation in Washington and in Berlin and London, which matter to us, is that the cost of asking Israel to relent on a massive attack on Iran, which frankly everyone assumes would have a destabilizing effect on the energy markets, not a good thing for an American president, any American president in an election year. There are all kinds of calculations in the background, but basically if we coordinate a limited and calibrated action that would not ignite the entire region, our reward would be a much more lenient American position towards Israel's plans to go into Rafah in the next matter of weeks from now, once we've implemented our plans for evacuating the displaced persons in the Rafah area to other parts of the Gaza Strip, so they are not in harm's way and our soldiers don't have to fight in an area saturated with civilians. once we do that, I believe that we would get something resembling a green light to go for Rafah. And frankly, this is right now perhaps the most important thing Israel can do to bring this war to a successful conclusion. So one thing needs to be said. Above and beyond what I've already mentioned about the ongoing CBW campaign in Syria, our escalating actions against Hezbollah in Lebanon, which are making this from a low intensity to a kind of mid-intensity conflict. They've already lost hundreds of their men. The Israeli Air Force is striking deep inside Lebanon, which in years past we never did. The equation is shifting, but in addition, there is another consideration, and a complex one. And that has to do with the Iranian nuclear project. It is moving forward. The time for a breakout is getting shorter, but nevertheless, it remains the assessment, I believe, of the American intelligence community, and so far also ours, that Iran has not yet made the crucial decision to go from 60% to 90% enrichment and to begin tooling a bomb. These are things that we believe we would be able to detect if and when they happen. And the decision to actually go after the Iranian nuclear project and with its various locations and infrastructure is probably the toughest any Israeli leader ever took. Certainly much tougher than the decision to go to Rafah or to go and conquer the Gaza Strip. Tough as these were, they pale in comparison with the magnitude of the challenge, if and when we have to make that decision. And we cannot make such a decision in the heat of the moment of responding to the Iranian attack, because there's huge issues are at stake. Our fervent hope is that the international community, which is always an elegant way of saying the United States, would recognize that once the Iranians gear up for possession of the bomb, they must be stopped, and they must be stopped not only by Israel, but by everyone who can bring munitions to bear on these Iranian targets. But for this to happen, we need a more solid indication that the Iranians have begun to make their last approach to the bomb. And it may not be very far off. We've just published in the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, which I edit, an essay by Oli Heinonen, a name may be familiar to many of you, was a chief inspector of the Iranian project, a man with very good reasons and very good knowledge of the Iranian project, and very good reasons to suspect that it is coming closer than ever to fruition. We may need to face this decision in the not very distant future, let's say in terms of months, maybe not weeks, but certainly not years. And that needs to be done, hopefully. We know that there's no guarantee for that. We know we have to prepare to do this ourselves, but hopefully this would be a matter not only for Israel to deal with, because the danger is global and far-reaching. So I think all of this has led to this decision to signal our commitment to punish the Iranians for what they did, but to use that old and tested phrase in Israel, we shall react at the time and manner of our own choosing. This has been true for Israeli tensions with other countries before, and it is true now. In fact, it does have the psychological effect of keeping the Iranians constantly tense against the possibility of an Israeli action. So that's where we are currently. As I said, I believe Rafah is in the cards. It's going to happen. We need to talk to the Egyptians to allay their fears that we intend to push these people south. We have to talk, of course, to the United States. There's going to be an American pier on the coast of Gaza soon enough. So all of these have to be taken into account. But basically, we're going ahead. And the Iranians will need to live on their toes for a while, but ultimately we will we will make this a painful cost for them, either directly or by dealing with their proxies. But not necessarily right now at the heat of the moment, when our sentiments are boiling, but our heads must stay cool. Any questions? Let me have. Should I look at the Q&A, or Alex, can you help me?
Sorry, I will help you. And thank you, Eran, for yet another lucid and stimulating analysis. There's an old saying that Jews answer a question with a question, but it seems to me that Zionists respond to an answer with a question. And since you've offered many answers, there are also many questions. Participants should see the Q&A icon in the bottom toolbar. If not, hover and it should appear, and that's how you can write your questions. I'll take the opportunity to ask the first question, which you've partially answered. Countering Iran's attack, the U.S., the UK, Jordanians, and others shot down Iranian drones and cruise missiles. The U.S. even shot down a few ballistic missiles. Since October 7th, President Biden has said more than once the U.S. will defend Israel. It's nice to have allies, but this makes Israel seem like a weak sister that needs defending, including in the eyes of the American people, rather than a strong ally that can defend itself and contribute to U.S. security. After all, the U.S.-Israel strategic partnership really started in 1970 when Israel came to the aid of the U.S. during the Black September crisis. The IDF helped to save Jordanian kingdom from a Soviet-backed PLO Syrian invasion, and President Nixon felt Israel had saved the day after our formal allies, including the UK, had quit on us. The optics seem very different today. As you said, the Iranian nuclear program will require more than an Israeli response, but still, this is very concerning to me. Are you concerned about this also? And if so, what should be done about it?
Well, I will not counter with a question. I will counter with a quote. I think it was Napoleon, or allegedly it was Napoleon, who said there's only one thing worse than fighting alongside allies, and it is fighting without them. And we appreciate the fact that we do have partners and allies in the region. I think it's actually a powerful signal to the Iranians. I think the role of the Israeli technological prowess and of the Israeli Air Force in this was predominant enough for this not to look as if, weak protected Israel has been saved by others. Let's say this was an 80-20 proposition. That's not necessarily a signal of weakness, and also what you see in Gaza is not exactly a projection of weakness. We may still have work to do there, but for example, I'm just throwing this statistic. Normally, you expect the defender to have the advantage at the rate of 3-1, also in casualties. The actual rate of casualties has been between 50 to 100 Hamas combatants for every Israeli soldier killed in action. I don't underestimate the loss and pain of each and every one of our losses, but we should appreciate the immense military capacity that Israel has demonstrated. And by the way, it's also demonstrated to our friends and allies in the West. And I'm sure the Germans, by the way, going back to Sunday night, feel very much vindicated in having bought the Arrow 3 system for a significant sum of money, and others may follow. We've done ourselves proud in terms of our capacity. So I don't think that's the issue. That poor little Israel is asking for help. It's more a question of consolidating a regional alignment, not alliance. That's a formal term, but it's an alignment, and it's an alignment that was tested and put to the test and succeeded.
Thank you, Eran. I'll just quote something Bernard Lewis once quoted, and that is to the effect that it's dangerous to be America's enemy, but it's even more dangerous to be America's ally. Not to say that I necessarily agree with that. Bernard Lewis quoted, I think, one of his Turkish interlocutors saying that.
Turks did quite well being America's ally over the years.
Further question is, there are claims that Israel miscalculated the Iranian response. This has gotten a lot of attention here in the US. What would you say to that?
Well, I think we anticipated an aggressive Iranian response to this event. Of course, Israel never took responsibility for the specific attack in Damascus. The running joke in Israel, it was the Liechtenstein Air Force. But having said so, there was a calculated risk taken that the Iranians would respond. And it was clear from pretty early on that there would be a different kind of Iranian response now. I'm not sure we miscalculated. It's more by way of taking a calculated risk of drawing the Iranians in a manner that would not actually serve their interest, but would serve ours. And so far, this has been the case. What's really important for us at the end of the day is to get rid of the Iranian regime. Ultimately, that's the ultimate solution. The Iranian people are seething with frustration. People openly praise Israel in Iran. I've just seen a report about a woman athlete who was arrested for expressing this sentiment. The problem is the Iranian regime, and in God's good time, we shall be rid of them. And if the international community wakes up and moves back towards sanctions that were lifted under the JCPOA, I think that would do more damage to the long-term survivability of the Iranian regime than a specific Israeli airstrike, leaving aside, as I said, the question of destroying the nuclear project, which would need to be dealt with in the right way, at the right moment, and based on very specific intelligence.
Thank you, Eran. Tying into what you just said, one of the questions is, why doesn't Israel arm, I'll say support, Iranian opposition groups the way Iran arms Israel's enemies? What do you say to that? Should Israel be trying to destabilize the regime using, undercover methods?
I wouldn't comment on undercover methods for my usual three reasons. I don't talk about things I don't know. I don't talk about things I do know. And I wouldn't let you know whether it's because of the first or the second. I would say that others are also deeply involved in destabilizing some segments of Iranian society. The Iranians are very suspicious of the Azeris. It's mutual. And a large segment of the population in northern Iran are actually Azeris, and some of them are restive, and the Iranians are worried. In the Khuzestan, I believe the Saudis are directly involved in stirring up Arab sentiments, and we've seen actual exchanges of fire and flare up between Iran and Pakistan over the Balochistan border, with the accusations of the Iranians supporting Shia militias in Pakistan and the Pakistanis supporting Baluchi Sunnis in Iraq. So we hardly need to pitch in for this to happen anyway. But beyond that, I think it's true that Iran is not a uniformly Persian empire. It has minorities, and beyond that, I think I would leave it to your fertile imagination.
Yeah, and I think it's true that Iran is now not majority Persian anymore. The minorities actually added up are the majority, which of course
Yeah, I would
great
say about
worry for
roughly 50%.
it's a great it's a,
No, we have to bear in mind, Khamenei himself is half Azeri. So not all minority elements are disloyal to the regime, but it's good to keep the regime on its toes. Let me carefully say that this was always part of what drove our relationship with Azerbaijan to the point it has reached and matured. There was a reason why the Azeris drove around celebrating their victory in the latest Nagorno-Karabakh war with Israeli, Turkish, and Pakistani flags. You would never see this combination anywhere else. And also why they lit the flame buildings in Baku on the 7th and the 8th of October with the Israeli flag colors in sympathy with Israel. So we are not unaware of certain aspects of the Iranian situation. Let's leave it at that.
Here's a further question. Is the success of this defense, meaning the missile defense, likely to lead to further and tighter defense coordination with the Arab states concerned about the Iranian threat? Is it likely to provide an opportunity for above-the-table alliances?
Well, I would be cautious right now about above the table. The Jordanians and the Saudis and others who were involved are very reticent about their role for obvious reasons. The Arab street is saturated with images of the horrors in Gaza. That's not exactly the right time for them to openly take pride in their contribution. But the structure that has been created, this air defense alignment, I say, people use the term MEAD, the Middle East Air Defense Treaty Organization. It's a false term. This is not a treaty and it's not an organization. But it is a framework led by CENTCOM. And here really you saw General Eric Kurilla spending days in advance of the Iranian attack in the what we call in Israel the hole in the ground, Habor, the underground command headquarters of the Israeli Air Force. He's been here before on exercises. We're very, and this is the result of a relationship with CENTCOM that has taken off completely. In my days, when I was still in uniform, CENTCOM essentially wouldn't touch us with a 10-foot pole. I remember giving briefings in a conference, a U.S. organized conference on ballistic missile defense. I'm talking about the mid-90s. And I spoke, and the guy who spoke after me was a CENTCOM analyst. And I thought he would keep a distance. Somehow the ice broke and we became close friends. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He was a good and dear friend of mine. But organizationally, CENTCOM kept their distance because, of course, any sign of Israel, any smell of Israel would have driven their clients in the Gulf away. This is no longer the case, period. Will this lead to overt Israeli-Saudi relations? There was a buzz about this before October 7. And there is good reason to think that Hamas chose its mode of operation and its timing with this in mind, in order to derail and break the prospects of Saudi-Israeli breakthrough. I'm not entirely convinced that we were on the verge of an overt, above-the-table relationship as yet, but the indications were strong. What we saw on the early hours of Sunday morning was that at the strategic level, we are on the same page. We may still be under the table, but we are reading from the same sheet of music.
What about the Russians? How do you feel about Russia's influence may have in all this, both Russia as now a client state of Iran almost, but also their presence in Syria and elsewhere?
Here it gets really complicated. Patrushev, called the National Security Advisor, I know him well personally. Patrushev has been there for ages. Called Hanegbi, and also offered the advice of restraint and so on. Obviously, the Russians have their own worries. Perhaps also worried about the fate of the Shahed factory, which has already been damaged mysteriously a few months ago in Isfahan. Basically, the Russians were not involved in any manner. And we have to bear in mind, we have been carrying forward our CBW, including during this period of war, with the Russian Air Force in Syria and with a channel of communication, which is not a secret. I've heard it referred to in public by Israeli figures. A channel of communication between our Air Force headquarters and their local Air Force headquarters in Khmeimim, which means that the Russians, and we share an interest in not going in each other's way or in harm's way against each other over Syrian airspace. We don't want to fight the Russians, and the Russians understand that they should not interfere with our operations because the consequences could be unpleasant for them. They have a memory of what happened to their Air Force in Egypt in 1970 and what happened to their air defense people in Syria in 82. And therefore, they don't want it. They also know that an all-out confrontation with Syria would endanger the survivability of the Assad regime, which has been one of the greatest gains in the international arena before they launched the Ukraine war. So we are no friends. Iran and Russia and China and North Korea are basically in this together in various modes of action against the existing global order. But with the Russians, we at least have an established channel of communication that limits the risks to them and to us in Syria.
Further question, if Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, etc., were to declare all-out war on Israel simultaneously, do you believe that Israel could survive that? And do you believe that Iran is the most difficult entity to fight of those entities?
No, I don't think the Iranians can really. We've seen how limited their capacity is. Of course, if they have nuclear weapons, it would be a very different proposition, but and a scary one. But they would also have to consider the likelihood of the combination of a failure to penetrate and being punished as if they did. So even in this respect, if, God forbid, we come to this kind of equation, what happened on Sunday actually signals that they have to rethink their equations. The most difficult challenge will not be Iran because they cannot penetrate our border, and we have robust missile and air defenses. The most serious problem is Hezbollah, because they are a dedicated and effective fighting force with an immense amount of medium and short-range capacity to attack Israel's rear areas. And they are ensconced in Lebanon, which is not exactly ideal tank country for the kind of maneuvering warfare that we excel in. And that is the main challenge. We may have to face it. We cannot allow Hezbollah to retain their present position with their Radwan force elements on our border in the north. We have to make it possible for the tens of thousands of Israelis who've been uprooted from the north to go back to their homes, whether by agreement or by war. But that's the main challenge that we face. Hamas by now is no longer capable of doing much. They can kill our soldiers in battle in Gaza here and there. The numbers are actually going down further and further. They can try at least still to intimidate the civilian population, frighten away local leaders and PA elements or whoever else tries to come in to try and replace them in governance in Gaza. But their military capacity to attack Israel has been literally decimated, cut down to a tenth of what it was. And to 100th or less of what it was in terms of rockets and missiles by our actions in the last 6 months. So Hezbollah are out of the game. In the West Bank, unless the PA turns around, the common interest of the PA security services, who know what is at stake if Hamas takes over, and of our people, enables us to retain an effective, not totally effective, but a relatively effective control. We saw this during Ramadan in Jerusalem and elsewhere. Hamas and the Iranians were hoping for an explosion. It simply didn't come. Syria, of course, is not. The Syrian military has demolished itself, killing its own people. So we have the Iraqi and Afghan or whatever militias that the Iranians brought. That's not a major challenge to Israel. So at the end of the day, if I count down, and the Houthis can be dealt with by us and others, they cannot bring forces to bear on Israel. So Hezbollah will remain the most important challenge. We've been preparing for that war for years. It's not going to be easy if it's forced on us, but I have no doubt that we can win it.
One final question before we conclude, and that is, has Israel made plans for the day after, once the fighting is over? Do you think the Hamula or clan approach has a chance of working? There have been some setbacks there. So what do you think will be the day after plan? The IDF has criticized the government supposedly for not having a plan. Some of that is CYA. But what would you say the plans would amount to at this point?
Well, I'm not entirely objective. I have been working in my own way with others, Israelis and Americans, to promote a vision for the day after, which sooner or later we're going to have to unveil in a public manner, because it's not moving fast enough in Israel, and we may need to bring the administration on board. And it's going to be a tough sell, but I don't see any effective alternative. The Hamula system, it's nice if you watch the third season of Fauda, but whether it actually can work as a frame of governance for Gaza is questionable. Arabs will not come in on their own. And I certainly don't even want to see the Egyptians taking over single-handedly, because that would require their divisions to sit not very far from Ashkelon. The PA, leave aside the ideological qualms and the anger that we may have with these cheats and betrayers. At the end of the day, they're simply incapable of doing this. And I would say to the good Americans who want to see the PA coming in, because they think that this would contribute to the two-state solution, this would ruin the two-state solution forever, because they're going to fail so miserably that they would be shot even in Ramallah, let alone fail in Gaza. So that's not a practical proposition. Even if you want it theoretically, it's not practical. So what we are left with are either a long-term Israeli stay, which I would argue against, and we cannot be the de-radicalizer agency in Gaza. We're not going to send our girl soldier teachers to the Gaza schools to explain to them why Islamist fantasies, Islamist totalitarianism is wrong and they should go back to Tanwiri interpretations of Islam. This has to be done by other people. But we need a powerful international umbrella controlling Gaza for a transitional period, indeterminate. I mean, in terms of years, not of months, not of decades, probably, because sooner or later you're going to be able to raise a local leadership which understands that the catastrophe that befell the Gazans was of their own doing. The kind of understanding that Germans had in 1945, rising from the rubble and all of a sudden learning to say to themselves, no, it wasn't them who did it to us, which is what they were taught after 1918, but we did this to ourselves. Let's relearn everything we thought was true. We've seen this happen elsewhere when totalitarianism was broken in the field of battle. And but we need a powerful international, to be precise, multinational presence. I'm saying multinational because the moment you say international, the shadow of the UN falls on this, and we don't want the UN to come within a mile of anything we need done. But a multinational template is already available, not in terms of the magnitude of the challenge. It's, in Gaza, it's 100 times more difficult. But the template of a multinational framework authorizing a presence on the ground already exists in Sinai, the MFO model. And so we need to take it, expand on it, and get the American administration to start mobilizing friends and allies for this mission, because it's important. It's important not only for us and not only for the Palestinians, but for the stability of the region and the implications for the global order.
Well, I'll just follow with one question about that, and that is, what if that happens and rockets get fired at Israel, and standing between Israel and the remnants of Hamas are these multinationals? And what if the multinationals don't do a good job cracking down on the remnants? Then what?
Okay, whatever format, let's call it for the sake of the argument, a group, an ICG, an international, or MCG, a multinational coordinating group, will have to sign very early on in the process a protocol of cooperation with Israel and specifically with the IDF, who does what under what circumstances. So the mission of going in and destroying that kind of challenge will probably be modeled on what written or unwritten understandings we have now in the West Bank when we operate against Hamas and Palestinian Jihad and all kinds of young crazies in Nablus or whatever, the lion's den, the kitten's den in practice. We have an understanding with the Palestinian security, preventive security, al-amn al-wiqai. Again, for the aficionados of Fauda, you would know how this works. There's always somebody on the other side of the phone, and we know how to do this, and they learned how to do this, and we can do the same in a more sophisticated manner with a multinational presence.
Well, thanks again, Eran, for a wonderful and extremely informative and timely briefing. Let me just say in conclusion that folks who are watching and would like to see more of this sort of analysis should go to the website of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and contribute to them. And also, of course, camera.org, the website of Camera, contribute to Camera, so we can continue to present these sorts of briefings for you folks. And thanks again, and goodbye for now.